This is a modern sperm whale. They're big. In fact, they're the largest toothed predators on Earth, easily reaching over 50 feet long. But despite being absolutely massive, they don't actually hunt anything near the surface. Instead, they take a deep breath, dive thousands of meters down into the midnight zone, and spend their entire lives hunting deep-sea squid. And because their entire diet consists of soft-bodied squid, their anatomy is actually pretty bizarre. They don't even have teeth on their top jaw. They just have a row of teeth on the bottom that fit perfectly into empty sockets on the top, which they use to basically just grip squid and swallow them whole. To us, and to basically every other animal at the surface of the ocean, the modern sperm whale is completely harmless. They just mind their own business, dive into the dark, and leave everything else alone. But millions of years ago, the sperm whale family was different. There was an ancient relative of the sperm whale that didn't dive deep. It didn't eat squid, and it didn't just have teeth on the bottom of its mouth. It had gigantic teeth on both jaws. This was Livyatan, and unlike its modern cousins, this whale wanted to stay at the surface. And instead of only hunting a bunch of squishy calamari, it hunted things that were actually its own size. But to actually understand how terrifying this animal was, we have to look at how we even figured out it existed in the first place. In 2008, researchers were digging in a desert in Peru. Millions of years ago, this desert was actually the bottom of the ocean, which makes it a pretty great place to look for marine fossils. And while they were digging, they found a skull. Except the skull they uncovered was nearly 10 feet long. Just the head alone was the size of a minivan. And yeah, you definitely wouldn't want to park next to that. At first, the researchers were genuinely confused. When you find a whale skull that massive from this specific time period, the assumption is always that it belongs to a baleen whale. Baleen whales are the giant filter feeders like humpbacks or blue whales, and they have huge heads to gulp down massive amounts of tiny krill. So, logically, finding a 10-foot skull meant they had just found another giant filter feeder. But as they cleared away the sand, they realized there was a flaw in that theory. This skull had huge, deep sockets lining both the upper and lower jaws. Filter feeders don't have teeth sockets because, well, they don't have teeth. This meant that whatever this animal was, it was a predator. And it was a predator so massive that it completely broke our understanding of what whales could actually do, because the teeth they found attached to this skull were just absurd. When people think of massive teeth, they usually think of the T-Rex. A fully grown T-Rex had teeth that were about 12 inches long, which is obviously horrifying. But Livyatan basically looked at the T-Rex and went, cute. Its teeth were 14 inches long. They're the largest biting teeth of any known animal in the entire history of the planet. Just a single tooth was longer than a human forearm, and this whale had rows of them, deeply embedded into both its upper and lower jaws. And this anatomy tells us exactly what this animal was doing. When your teeth are over a foot long and as thick as tree branches, you cannot use them to catch tiny squid. If you try to bite a squid with teeth that massive, it's just going to slip right through the gaps, which is highly embarrassing for a 50-ton apex predator. Teeth like this only exist for one specific purpose. They're designed to sink deep into thick blubber, lock onto heavy bone, and tear massive chunks of flesh out of large animals. So if you have teeth that are literally larger than a T-Rex, what exactly are you using them on? When you're a 50-foot-long predator, you have an even worse problem. You need a ridiculous amount of food just to stay alive. You can't survive by eating small fish or sharks. You'd burn more energy chasing them down than you'd actually get from eating them. So Livyatan solved this problem by eating the only thing in the ocean that was big enough to sustain it: other whales. Yes, this giant whale was surviving entirely by eating other whales. Specifically, it hunted smaller baleen whales that lived at the surface. Livyatan was essentially just a 50-foot-long orca. If you've ever seen footage of modern killer whales hunting, you know how brutal they are. They ram their prey, bite onto their fins, and physically drown them. Now, take that exact same level of aggression, but scale it up to an animal that weighs 50 tons and has 14-inch teeth. They didn't bother slowly drowning anything. They just swim up, bite a massive chunk out of a 20-foot baleen whale, and kill it almost instantly through sheer blunt force trauma. But having massive teeth doesn't really matter if you can't actually find your prey in the open ocean. So how did they track them down? Modern sperm whales have a massive structure inside their heads called the spermaceti organ. It's basically a giant barrel filled with oil and wax. They use this organ to create the loudest sound produced by any animal on Earth. They click, and the sound waves travel through the water, bounce off objects, and return to the whale, allowing them to see in the deep ocean. The sound is actually so powerful that modern sperm whales can literally vibrate squid to death just by clicking at them. Because Livyatan's skull has the exact same shape as a modern sperm whale, we know it had one of these too. But Livyatan was using this built-in radar to scan the open ocean for massive baleen whales. Sound travels incredibly fast underwater, meaning Livyatan could likely track a group of whales from miles away. Long before the prey even knew they were being hunted, Livyatan already knew exactly where they were, how fast they were moving, and how big they were. There was nowhere to hide. So, we have a 50-foot whale, armed with 14-inch teeth and a built-in radar. But could this thing actually take down the biggest animal on Earth? Because Livyatan hunted baleen whales, it's pretty natural to wonder what would happen if it tried to hunt the absolute largest baleen whale to ever exist, the modern blue whale. If Livyatan was alive today, could it kill one? Well, realistically, no. A full-grown blue whale is simply too big. They can reach up to 100 feet long and weigh over 150 tons. Even for a 50-foot predator with the biggest teeth in history, attacking an adult blue whale is basically suicide. If Livyatan tried to bite it, the blue whale is so incredibly heavy that it would just drag the Livyatan right along for the ride. And if a blue whale hits you with its tail, your ribs are going to shatter, no matter how big you are. It's just physics. But that's only if we're talking about an adult. A blue whale calf is a completely different story. Calves are much smaller, much slower, and don't have the muscle mass to defend themselves. Oh, sorry babies. If Livyatan was in the modern ocean, adult blue whales would be safe, but their babies would be incredibly easy targets. But even if adult blue whales were off the menu, Livyatan still completely ruled the surface. Well, almost. Usually an animal this massive is at the very top of the food chain, nothing else even comes close. But Livyatan had a problem. It lived during the Miocene epoch, which means it shared the exact same oceans at the exact same time with the megalodon. This is incredibly rare in nature. Having two apex predators that weigh over 50 tons living in the exact same waters usually ends in disaster. One of them is going to outcompete the other, and the loser goes extinct. But they didn't. They both thrived. And the craziest part is, they were competing for the exact same food source. Both Megalodon and Livyatan relied entirely on hunting small to medium-sized baleen whales. They were swimming in the same areas, looking for the exact same prey. So, what happens when the two deadliest predators in Earth's history inevitably run into each other? If a 50-foot Megalodon and a 50-foot Livyatan actually fought, it would basically come down to two completely different styles of killing. Megalodon had a jaw lined with hundreds of serrated teeth, designed for clean slicing. It would try to bite off a flipper or a tail to immobilize the whale, and then let it bleed out. Livyatan, on the other hand, had puncturing teeth. It would try to bite deep into the shark's cartilage and crush its vital organs. Plus, Livyatan was a mammal, which means it was way smarter than a shark and could actually think during the fight. So, who wins? Honestly, the real answer is they probably just avoided each other. When you're a 50-ton animal, getting into a fight with another 50-ton animal basically means you're screwed. Even if you win, you're going to walk away with injuries. A broken jaw or a deep gash means you can't hunt anymore. And if you can't hunt, you starve. Neither animal wanted to risk getting hurt that badly. If a Megalodon saw a Livyatan eating a whale, it probably just looked at it, went,
"Nope, you have a good day, sir,"
and swam somewhere else. But if they did fight, Livyatan actually had one massive advantage that the Megalodon simply couldn't compete with. Sharks are solitary hunters. A Megalodon lived alone, hunted alone, and died alone. Which sounds incredibly depressing, but it worked for them. But Livyatan was a mammal. And if we look at modern sperm whales and modern killer whales, they're incredibly social animals. They live in complex family structures, they communicate with each other, and most importantly, they hunt together. We don't know for sure if Livyatan hunted in pods, but because of its brain size and its evolutionary family tree, it's highly likely that they at least traveled in small groups. And that changes everything. A single 50-foot predator is dangerous, but animals that actually share information and work together to hunt are nearly impossible to beat. If a Megalodon ran into a single Livyatan, it might be an even fight. But if it ran into three of them working together, the shark stands absolutely zero chance. Hunting together means you can kill way bigger things. And if one of you gets hurt, the rest of the group can still get dinner. But even with all that brain power and teamwork, Livyatan did actually have a physical limit. It's easy to look at 14-inch teeth and assume that Livyatan had the strongest bite in the ocean. But anatomically, that actually isn't true. Megalodon had a much wider jaw and a stronger bite force. Its jaws were designed to shear completely through bone and blubber in one clean motion. Livyatan jaws were built for one specific thing: gripping. Because its teeth were basically just giant spikes. When Livyatan bit down, the teeth would puncture deep into the prey, locking them in place. Once it locked on, Livyatan would probably just use its massive neck muscles to thrash and drag the animal until it died. It was an effective way to kill, but it required a lot more exertion than the Megalodon strategy. Livyatan had to wrestle its prey to death, which burns a massive amount of oxygen and energy. It was basically the cardio workout from hell. But regardless of how it actually killed its food, a predator this massive still begs the question: what would happen if this thing was still swimming around today? If you dropped a population of Livyatan into the modern ocean, it wouldn't even be fair. Modern baleen whales have spent the last few million years evolving in an ocean that doesn't have any giant predators. Because Megalodon and Livyatan went extinct, modern whales lost the need to be fast or agile. They just got really, really big, and they feed slowly at the surface. They have literally zero defenses against a predator like this. Humpback whales, grey whales, and right whales would be completely decimated. They're too slow to run away, and they don't have the teeth to fight back. For Livyatan, swimming through the modern ocean would basically just be picking off slow, giant targets that have completely forgotten how to fight. And honestly, human boats would actually be in danger. Modern sperm whales have been known to occasionally ram ships, but a Livyatan that actively hunts at the surface and treats large floating objects as potential food would be a massive hazard to commercial shipping. But obviously, you don't have to worry about a 50-foot killer whale sinking your cruise ship because Livyatan is dead. So, if it was so overpowered, how did it lose? Being the biggest, smartest, and deadliest animal in the ocean sounds like a perfect strategy, but it actually comes with a flaw. When you weigh 50 tons, your metabolism demands a massive supply of calories. You cannot survive on scraps. Livyatan had to eat small baleen whales to survive. There was literally nothing else in the ocean that could keep a body that big alive. And that means Livyatan was completely dependent on just one specific type of food. If you're a smaller predator, you can switch up your diet. If the fish disappear, you eat crabs. If the crabs disappear, you eat squid. But Livyatan didn't have that option. It was locked into a highly specialized diet. And when you rely entirely on one specific animal to survive, what happens when that animal just disappears? At the end of the Miocene epoch, the Earth started to change. The global climate shifted and the ocean temperatures began to drop significantly. This drop in temperature completely wiped out the surface food chain that the Livyatan needed. The small baleen whales that it hunted couldn't survive in the changing climate. Many of them simply died out. The ones that did survive just got massive, like the ancestors of the blue whale, because having a bigger body helps you hold on to heat. And to find food, these newly gigantic whales migrated out of the warm waters and moved into the freezing oceans. Livyatan couldn't follow them. It was adapted to warmer waters and it didn't have the blubber thickness to survive in the freezing poles. And even if it could follow them, the remaining whales were now simply too big to hunt. Livyatan didn't get hunted to extinction by some bigger, badder predator. The deadliest whale in Earth's history was ultimately defeated by a slight drop in temperature. Its food vanished, and it simply starved to death. And Livyatan wasn't the only one who completely failed to adapt to this new ocean. This exact same climate shift is exactly what killed the Megalodon. Both of these massive apex predators were playing the exact same game. They both relied on hunting small baleen whales in warm waters, and when the water got cold and the whales disappeared, both of them were completely helpless. It didn't matter that Megalodon had a stronger bite force. It didn't matter that Livyatan had bigger teeth and a bigger brain. When there's no food left in the water, weighing 50 tons is actually the worst possible thing you can be. Your massive body just becomes a burden that you can no longer afford to feed. But while Livyatan and Megalodon were busy starving at the surface, someone else was actually surviving. While Livyatan was going extinct, the ancestors of the modern sperm whale were taking a completely different approach to survival. Instead of staying at the surface and trying to hunt other whales, they started diving deep. They realized that the deep ocean was completely full of squid. And more importantly, the deep ocean doesn't really care what the climate is doing at the surface. Whether it's an ice age or a global heat wave, the bottom of the ocean stays exactly the same. So these whales slowly lost their top teeth. They lost their ability to hunt large prey. They gave up on being surface apex predators entirely. And because they did that, they survived. While the 14-inch toothed Livyatan starved to death, its squid-eating cousins quietly outlived it and inherited the ocean. They're still huge, they're still really cool, but just not necessarily whale-eating monsters. We like to think of evolution as a straight line where animals just get bigger, stronger, and deadlier over time. We look at giant teeth and assume that animal was the pinnacle of biology. But the ocean doesn't actually care how big your teeth are. The ocean is completely full of extinct animals that were perfectly designed for worlds that simply don't exist anymore. Livyatan was the ultimate predator for a warm, whale-filled ocean. But the second that ocean cooled down, all that power meant absolutely nothing. Nature doesn't actually filter for strength, it filters for change. Livyatan proves that being the biggest and the deadliest doesn't guarantee your survival. Terrifying? Yes. The most terrifying whale to ever exist? Also yes. But when the world shifts, biting hard doesn't matter anymore. You just have to know how to adapt. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. This is the first video on this channel, so please show some support in the comments. I'm going to try my best to reply to most of you guys, and I'll genuinely read any suggestions you have. My hope one day is that I'll be able to grow this channel big, so I really appreciate anyone who helps support me from the beginning.